Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today is one of our commentary days, so rather than a review, I'm going to talk to you about an issue that I think is really important, which is safety features in a role playing game or in a role playing environment. I am a game master, not just for fun, but also professionally. I am available for hire, so please hire me to run a game for you. But one thing that I think is really important, and what brought this up to me, is that last week I was on a digital panel, an online panel on Zoom, and we streamed it through my Twitch channel, which is Typecast, where there's a handful of PhD researchers at NYU who are doing a huge project on role playing games and how people play and different tools that they use and different challenges that they encounter and on and on. And it's been a really fascinating thing to be a part of. They've done surveys and it's their project, and I'm only very peripherally involved, primarily just as an interview subject. But they put together this digital panel of professional game masters, and there were four of us that were interviewed on the panel, and you can find that on Twitch. I'll make sure that I get the link to it in the liner notes below this video if you're interested. But what was really interesting to me is, they asked us some questions, the researchers, and then they opened it up to audience questions, and we got flooded. There were tons of audience questions, and a surprising number of them. Maybe not surprising, because anyone who's played a lot of role-playing games should have seen this coming. But there was an enormous number of those audience questions that were all about safety issues. I think one of the players in my game is, doing this thing that makes me uncomfortable. There's this player in my game who keeps, using a really racist accent. There's a player in my game who, is constantly making fun of me because, my character is bisexual or asexual or something like that. All of these questions about comfort and safety and, what I consider to be common courtesy. And so rather than answer a lot of the more detailed, nitty-gritty, how do you become a professional GM kind of questions, we mostly just talked about safety, and that's what I want to do today. Safety at a role-playing game. First of all, I know, because I've done this before, I know that there are people watching this video right now who are like, safety? That is dumb. What kind of idiots are worried about being unsafe at a role-playing game? And frankly, if that's what you're thinking to yourself, then you're the ones that are making everyone else uncomfortable at the gaming table. So knock it off. A role-playing game is like any social activity. It is designed for people to enjoy themselves. And part of the social contract that we make when we sit down with another group of people, is we want to make sure everyone is having fun, that everyone can feel comfortable. And yes, that includes safety. And no one, well, I shouldn't say no one. It is exceptionally rare that someone feels physically unsafe as if their actual life were in danger at a role-playing table. If it gets to that point, things have already gone incredibly far off the rails. When I talk about safety, I'm not saying make sure that you're, got your conceal and carry permit so you can defend yourself from the other players. That is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is creating an environment where everyone who plays feels safe to express themselves, feels comfortable being around the other players and the game master, feels like they can tell the kinds of stories they want to tell, and participate fully in the game without having to constantly guard themselves from abuse or mockery. And that's what we mean by safety. Creating an environment where people can be themselves. Okay? Now, step number one, or I guess not step number one, but fact number one, statement number one that I want to make, is there are some people who just straight up should not be in the same game group as each other. If you've got someone who is, blatantly homophobic and vocal about it, well, I don't want to play with that guy, first of all, but that guy should definitely not be in the same group as a homosexual, as someone who is good, just right. So, and this is something that can be a problem. A lot of groups get into this, and it often is just one guy, right? There's that one person who's been in your friend group for a while, and he's kind of aggressive, and he's kind of rude, but you've known him forever, and you constantly make excuses for him. I've been in groups with people like that. I've had people like that show up for convention games that I run, and everyone there's like, oh, he'll drop something. He'll say something that's kind of misogynist or whatever. And then everyone will be like, okay, chill out, buddy. But then they don't actually do anything about it. And they just kind of pass it off, or they excuse the behavior. And so one of the main things about safety is, if you are in a group where that kind of thing happens and where it is not being addressed or fixed, step one, you talk to the game master and you talk to the other players and you express your concerns. Step two, if they still won't do anything about it, you don't need to stay in that group, because those people are not your friends. If they say they're your friends but they still insist on doing things that you consider rude and uncomfortable, then no, they're very bad friends. There's no two ways about that. And so there are absolutely people who just do not mesh with each other, who should not be in the same game group as each other. You can let all the homophobes get together and have their own game with each other, and they can do their thing. You find a group of, people that you are going to feel safe with, people that are going to be nice to you. Because if they're not being nice to you, why do you want to play a game with them? One of the great things that we have in the modern world is this incredible proliferation of online and digital role-playing game systems. I and every other professional game master out there, we run games online all the time. We put together groups of people who want to play, but they don't have anyone to play with. If you are in a position where you feel like you are not being accepted or you're not being treated well at your game table, leave that, contact a professional GM, and you can get hooked up with another group of friendly players so much more quickly and easily than you realize. Anyway, that, however, is the nuclear option. And sometimes it absolutely has to be taken, but there's a lot of steps that can be taken first. And so, you do what you need to do and what makes you comfortable. But that's why I recommend that step one, in most cases, can be talk to the game master and see what can be put into place. So let's talk about the kinds of things that can be put into place. It might be as simple as talking to the person and saying, hey, back off a little bit. But there's a lot more, there are many more robust things that can be done to keep everyone comfortable and happy and friendly to each other at a game table. And so let's talk about these safety tools. The first one is the one that I've got right here in this image, which is the X card. The X card is something that I was introduced to by my friend Alan Barr, who's an incredible game designer. He runs Gallant Knight Games. I talk about him a lot because he's fantastic. And he didn't invent the X card. It's been around for a long time, but he's the one who told me about it, and I love it. And I use it now in every game that I run. The X card is literally just what it looks like. It's a piece of paper, a 3x5 card that you've written the letter X on. And the way you use this is at the start of the campaign or the start of the session, if it's a one-shot, before everyone sits down to play. And a weekly reminder every time you have a new session is not a bad idea. You hold this card up and you say, this is the X card. Anytime anybody does or says something that makes you uncomfortable or that you don't want as part of our game, or that you just don't want to deal with, you tap the X card, or you hold up the X card, or you just say out loud X card, and then we will, without hesitation and without question, we will drop it. You know, this might require a clarifying question of which element exactly are you X-carding? And then the person will say, oh, you know, this person is threatening to torture the person. I don't like torture, and it makes me very uncomfortable. I don't want to have torture in this game. And then everyone else at the table says, okay, no torture, done, and you move on. And that is vital to the function of this and every safety tool. Is every player in the game has to buy into it and has to agree to abide by it. Now, what you may be thinking to yourself is, well, why are we going to let this person control everything, right? What if we want to torture an NPC, and then that makes a lot of sense? Why can one person step in and say no? Well, because that person is your friend, and you want that person to be comfortable at the table. And doing something that makes everybody happy is more important than torturing that one NPC, or whatever element is getting X-carded. Okay? And that is the premise, that is the foundation that makes the safety tools work, is everyone is looking for, primarily, above all else, a fun environment where everyone can be comfortable. It is so much easier to cut an offensive element out of your game, even if you personally don't find it offensive. It is easier to cut that out of your game and move on than to have a long argument about how this person is just being a crybaby or whatever. You know, just move on. Get over it. Do something that makes everybody happy instead of something that makes you happy and another person uncomfortable. So, that is the X card. Very easy to use. I use it in all of my games. One thing that a story that I love to tell, just to illustrate how much I use the X card. Over last summer in 2020, I was hired to run a one-shot horror game for a guy's birthday. He wanted to get his brothers and his cousins together and do a horror RPG, and we chose the Aliens RPG. And these were guys that had grown up together. They knew each other well. They teased each other constantly. And so I knew going into it that these guys were going to spend all 4 hours of this role-playing session swearing at each other and cussing each other out, and that they would love it. Because that's how they interact, and that's how they have always interacted. Even knowing that, going into this, I started out and said, we want to make sure everyone is comfortable. We want to make sure everyone has a good time. This is the X card. Here's how we use it. Nobody did, and everyone was fine, and everyone was happy all through the game. But we had it there in case we needed it. And they all agreed to it as well. They're like, yes, we're not going to mock somebody. Even though all they did was mock each other, they did make that agreement. If somebody is uncomfortable, we're going to honor that, we're going to respect that, and we're going to move on and do something else. Now, let's talk about some of the other safety tools. Another one that I use a lot is called Lines and Veils. And this is a tool that you use at the beginning of a campaign. When you do Session 0, Session 0 is where you all get together, you make characters, you kind of figure out what the campaign's going to be about and what the tone of it is and everything. Lines and Veils are a way of kind of codifying, of establishing in advance what is going to be acceptable and what is not. And the difference between the two is one of degree. A line is something we do not cross. And so we say, what are the things we absolutely don't want to allow in our game? And two of the really common ones that pop up, for example, is rape and sexual violence. I've never had a group not immediately draw a line around those and say, okay, line, we do not cross. There's not going to be sexual violence in our game. Now, if you are in a group that wants that, that's fine. That's the reason that we do this. That's the reason that these are tools to use that you can customize, rather than me sitting here on YouTube forcing you to play your game in a different way. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you, with your friends, figure out where the lines are for you. Are you going to allow sexual violence? Are you going to allow racism in your game? Are you going to allow, sexism in your game? One thing that cropped up in my Twitch campaign, The Gods of Veyron, when we started that, is we drew a very clear line against real-world racism, but we left the option open for certain kinds of in-game racism. And so there is nobody in the world who, for example, hates black people, but there are absolutely characters in the world who hate half-orcs or elves or what we call Bonelanders, which are kind of Stone Age tribes. And so there's a lot of racism between the Stone Age people and the more advanced medieval people who just don't trust each other and don't get along. And we established right up front that that was going to be okay, but that was as far as we would push it. And we wanted to tell stories about that kind of racial tension without getting into real-world racial tension. We didn't want that line to be crossed. So we established that line. That's what the lines are for. We will not deal with this at all. A veil is slightly softer. A veil is something where you say, if this happens in-game, we will draw a veil over it. This is the kind of thing where you fade to black or you fast forward. And so a common one for this is sex and torture. It may be that you decide as a group, we will allow torture in our game, but we will not depict torture in our game. If the characters get captured by the bad guys, we will say, yes, we're comfortable with that character being tortured by the villain, but we're not going to show it on screen. We're going to pull that curtain across, we're going to draw the veil and say, and then the character was tortured, move on. Sex is another one, that, if you don't want to actually graphically depict sex in your game, you can draw that veil and say, yes, this happens. Pendragon, this comes up a lot because the characters have families, they have children, they are constantly flirting and courting. Vampire the Masquerade is one where sex comes up a lot because seduction it can be a big part of that. And so just depending on how much of that you want to do, you can draw lines, you can draw veils, and custom tailor the campaign and the tone of the campaign to only include the elements that you as a group have decided, yes, we like this and we want to include this, but when it gets to this, we're going to stop. We're either going to fast forward through it or we're going to not allow it at all. So that's what lines and veils are. It's a really useful, valuable tool. Now, there are cases where... Let's talk about two more. There are two more systems that are similar to the X card in that you have things on the board. You have things sitting on the table, physical cards. These are more difficult to do when you are in a digital environment. But it's, there are ways around it in Roll20 or something like that. You could have little cards that people can tap. But more often than not, when you're playing online, you have to use these systems out loud. So the first one is called the consent flower, which sounds, I understand. I know is every time I say it out loud that sounds like the most ridiculous thing, the consent flower, but it's actually awesome. Okay? Let me tell you what it does. Basically, you have 3 cards. And the way that it was presented to me, and the reason that it is called a flower, is that you put them in the shapes of flowers or flower petals or whatever. You don't have to do that. Okay? You can put them into the shape of guns if you want. I don't care. The point is that you've got 3 cards, and they are basically the colors of a stoplight. There's green, yellow, and red. Okay? And so while you are in a scene, if two characters are interacting, maybe it's a player and a game master who is taking on the role of a villain or something, or maybe it's two players talking to each other. Whatever is happening, they get into tricky territory. They bring up a subject. Maybe it becomes a seduction, or maybe they just start relating a really horrific backstory. Whatever it is, it's something that is questionable. And then anyone at the table can tap on those cards. Green means, yeah, I am comfortable with this. Let's go. Dive in. And so if, let's say you're playing Vampire the Masquerade and you start to seduce someone because you're going to move in and drink their blood. And that has a lot of aggressive elements in it and potentially some sexual overtones as well. And that might make people at the table uncomfortable, especially if they have some past trauma associated with those kinds of activities. If that person taps green, then everyone knows, okay, we're good to go. We're going to continue this scene and we're going to allow this to play out. If that person or any person touches the yellow one, that means let's back off of this a little bit. Let's tone this down. Let's slow it a little bit. And if somebody touches the red one, that means, nope, we're skipping this. It's analogous in many ways to the X card. And say, stop. This is making me uncomfortable. We need to move on. Very similar is another system that is called script change, though I have also heard this called video edit or just remote control. And the reason is because you've got 3 cards that are called rewind, pause, and fast forward. And I love this one. This might be my favorite one because the differences between those 3 cards are so useful. The very specific use of, rewind versus fast forward can really add something. So the way that you use those cards, again, you're in a scene, something happens. If somebody pushes pause, then that means we need to take a break, we need to take a breather, maybe I need to gather myself, or maybe I just want to say something to the rest of the group, or whatever it is. Pause means we stop so that we can back off just a little bit. And then presumably you'll have a conversation, or someone will go outside and take some deep breaths and then come back in and say, okay, I'm fine, don't worry about it, let's go. Or maybe they'll say, hey, I'm really uncomfortable with this, let's talk about why, or whatever it is. The fast forward button means it's similar to a veil in a way. You can push that fast forward button, and that means I'm not entirely comfortable with what's happening right now. Let's skip until the end of the scene. And so the thing that is happening still happens, but we don't have to see it. It happens off stage. We fast forward through it, we start a new scene, and we move on. Rewind, that's the full-on retcon button, right? Where you say, nope, I do not want this thing to happen. I am not comfortable with the way that it is happening. We're going to rewind and we're going to start over and we're going to do it a different way. Think of it as a retcon button. One of the things I loved recently, I'm a huge fan of the WandaVision show on Disney Plus, and there is a rewind at the end of episode 2. The characters hear a weird noise, and Wanda and Vision go outside, and they see something that makes them both profoundly uncomfortable. And Wanda says, no. And then everything rewinds, and then it starts over, and the scene goes in a different direction. And, they're using that for a specific storytelling purpose about Wanda and her acceptance of reality. We can use that in role-playing games as a way of saying, you know what, this doesn't make me comfortable. We're going to take this story in a different direction. And so the script change, the remote control, I really like that system a lot. And that is just the rewind, the pause, and the fast forward. Now, I sincerely hope that anyone who has watched this entire video and gotten this far into it with me, that you are on board with the idea of making your friends comfortable when you play a game together. And I hope that everyone out there can find these or other RPG safety tools that you like, that work with you and your group and your friends. These kind of came about in convention RPGs or in game store RPGs, where you are playing with a group of people that you don't know. And they can be incredibly useful and valuable in that environment where somebody doesn't necessarily know your background or what you have lived through or what makes you comfortable or uncomfortable. And so having these tools is useful. But even in a group of friends who do know each other, who game together all the time, these can still be really helpful. This kind of thing has cropped up even in our typecast games. In the last episode of our Star Trek Horizon, which ran last week, we had, I was running the session, the characters were down on this planet, and they were harvesting bananas. And I referred to it as a banana plantation. And two of the characters immediately were like, wait, what kind of plantation? Are these slaves? And I said, no, this is, it's not a slave plantation. It's just, that's the word for a place where you grow bananas. And they said, we're not going to call it that. And it clearly made them uncomfortable. And I immediately said, okay, you're right, we're not. It's, from now on, it is an orchard. It is a banana orchard or a banana farm. And everybody accepted it, and everybody moved on. And that is with a group of people that I have known for a long time. And it didn't occur to me that that would be a problem. It clearly was. And without, mocking anyone, without questioning anybody, without prevaricating or hesitating, the entire group just said, okay, you're right, change. And it didn't hurt the game in any way. It didn't ruin the story. It changed the game so that everyone could participate in the story more fully without feeling weird about anything. And so these are really valuable, useful tools at absolutely every gaming table and at every level of play. So I really hope that there's something here you can use. And if you want to look them up, just look up RPG safety tools, and you can read all about them because there's so many more beyond just the 4 that I've talked about today, which is XCard, Lines and Veils, Consent Flower, and the remote control script change system. So anyway, thank you so much for watching this. I hope that you've been able to take something from this that will make your game group better and happier and more comfortable. And good luck to you and have a lot of fun. Anyway, my name is Dan Wells. I'm an author, and you can read all of my books. I've got 19 books in print in a lot of different genres that you can look up. There's a link below this video. I am also a professional game master, and I can run a game for you and your friends, or even for you all by yourself with some other friends that I can find for you. And it'll be a blast. So anyway, thanks.